right, my friends, it's now time for the Soulful Psalms segment of Beacon of Truth. The Soulful Psalms, we take one of the Psalms from the wisdom literature of the Old Testament, the 150 Psalms that we hear in every single Mass, and we connect that Psalm to your everyday lived experience. And what's awesome is that the Soulful Psalms and the Beacon of Truth playlists are now their own podcast. You can get it anywhere where you stream podcasts or go to Podcast Central at EWTN.com. Today, we're going to continue our look at Psalm 18. So Psalm 18 is in Book 1 of the Psalms, Psalms 1 to 41. All of those Psalms are attributed to King David. This particular Psalm has a very long prescript, which is about 2 verses long. And it says, well, I'll read it in English. For the choir master of David, the servant of the Lord, who spoke the words of this canticle to the Lord, when he had been freed from the power of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. Right? He said, and then it dives right in. So remember, so what's going on here? So remember, 1 Samuel, basically, 1 Samuel 18 through 24, toward the end of there, we see that David is being pursued by Saul. You know, Saul becomes jealous of David. Saul, first of all, brings David into his court because David killed Goliath. He saw the bravery and the heart of David, so he brings David into his fold. He becomes very good. David becomes very good friends with Jonathan, one of Saul's sons. But then Saul becomes jealous of David because David's conquest, and he's, leading the armies and having all these victories, and then the ladies in the court of Saul start to sing, Saul has killed his hundreds, but David has killed his thousands, and Saul becomes jealous and tries to kill David. First, he tries to have him killed by putting him in battle against the Philistines, is kind of revenge for killing Goliath, but David is victorious, and so he pursues him, and David runs. And so this is when everything ended, when David wrote this particular psalm. We're picking up at verse 8. So David here is talking about, I was in this place of anguish, I was this place of pain, and the Lord rescued me. And so verse 8 starts when things started to change. It says, then the earth reeled and rocked. The mountains were shaken to their base. They quaked at his terrible anger. So again, typical David, using analogies from nature and from the created order in order to make an analogy with the Lord, with how the Lord is working in his life and it's his situation. It didn't escape David when he looked at the natural things that were happening, earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and thunderstorms and tornadoes and all these other things, to use that language to describe, in a sense, an emotional attributes to God. Now, of course, we know that God doesn't have an emotion because he's not a human being. He's pure spirit. He's God. But when we're trying to describe experiences that we are going through as human beings, the way we do that, we use our human language and we attribute some human attributes and emotions and feelings to God. Not as a way to limit God, not as a way to explain God, but as a way of understanding and putting into words how God has been working in our life. And David does this over and over again very beautifully in the Psalms. So he's talking about how he cried out to the Lord in his anguish, in his pain, and then we see the Lord start to work. And then the earth reeled and rocked. Okay, Lord, here comes the Lord. Here he comes. He's moving. He's going to be moving and shaking things up in my life right now. He's coming into that turmoil. He's coming into that trouble. He's coming into that pain. Here comes the Lord. He's shaking things up. And the way that David describes this as the an earthquake. So God causes an earthquake in our troubledness, and he brings that earthquake in order to bring orderliness. And he continues in verse 9. Smoke came forth from his nostrils, and scorching fire from his mouth. From him were kindled live coals. So he's describing an earthquake and then a volcanic eruption, right? Because God is going to come. He's going to trouble the waters. He's going to bring the earthquake. He's going to bring the eruption. He's going to cause this great disruption in my disruption, right? So it's very interesting. Sometimes we think we're going through times of trial and tribulation and heartbreak and pain, that God will bring peace. Well, God will bring a calming sense. But it's very interesting the way David describes this, that in the midst of his trouble and turmoil, God is bringing the earthquake. He's bringing the volcano. So in other words, he's bringing disturbance to his disturbance. You see, it's almost like negative, like two negatives make a positive. It's like, for example, in science, right? You have sound waves. And sometimes you do this in music, right? You have sound waves. These sound waves come at each other, and then they hit each other, and they cause either a node or an antinode, right? So positive or a negative. So David is talking about here, he has this negative going on in his life, and God is bringing the disturbance in order to create a positive thing out of his situation, which I think is absolutely awesome.
Yeah, and we've heard it said, God's not bringing you to something, he's bringing you through it. So if we're always asking for peace so that something will go away, we're missing the journey of the things. I know for me, and you probably the same, is it gains my confidence in who I am, what I'm capable of with God's help, what I'm able to rely on him for when it's not anything that I can control. Like, all of these things is a practice of faith. It is a growth through it, not to go around it.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to go through it. And I think what's interesting with what you just said is when David's describing how the Lord comes into his life, it comes in a way that David can't control.
Mm-hmm.
David can't control the earthquake. David can't control the volcanic eruption, but he's describing it like, pow, God is coming.
Yeah.
Right? He can feel the presence of God coming. But interesting, it depends on your temperament, right? So David is a warrior.
Mm-hmm.
So God doesn't come as a dove. He comes in language that David can understand. David understands, war. So so the Lord comes in an earthquake. He comes in a volcanic eruption, and David sees that Lord is coming. Because look what he says next. He says, "He bent the heavens and came down. A black cloud was under his feet." Look at the way he bent the heavens and came down. I love that. He like, so we talked about the tiers of heaven. We have the earth and the sky, then outer space, and then the heavens where God dwells. God bent that. He bent the firmament. He changed the course of created reality in order to penetrate into my life, into my existence, into my circumstances, to meet my needs, to connect his heart with my heart. He bent the heavens and came down. And this is beautiful because this also speaks to the incarnation, right? Where the word came down from heaven in the womb of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And as John says in John chapter 1, verse 14, and the word became flesh and dwelt among us. So God did rend the heavens and come down. He came down to be with us. He came down to the midst of our sin. Now, David was talking about his troubles with Saul, but we can make an analogy with sin. He came into our existence. He came into ours, and he came in a very powerful way. God himself, the second person of the Trinity, the Word of God, bent down and came low to be with us because he wants to show how much he loves us. I love that. A dark cloud, a black cloud was under his feet. On a cherub, he rode and he flew. So we talk about the cherubim and the seraphim. So we have the 9 levels of angels, and the cherubim and the seraphim are the angels that serve closest to God. Right? So he talks about how God is coming into his life. He causes the disturbance within the disturbance, and then he breaks through that disturbance and makes his presence known to us. And again, beautiful the incarnation, how God created reality, and the word that has existed from all eternity comes down to us, to be with us, to take on a human nature, to experience our suffering, to experience our pain, to experience our joy, to experience us, right? In order to do one thing, to save us from our sin, to save us from isolation, to save us from desolation, to save us from ourselves.
For more on the Psalms with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, check out Beacon of Truth weekdays at 4 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio and streaming everywhere you listen to podcasts.